Well. It's time to talk about what's just happened there on AEW. That's right, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and this is my brand new classroom as we embark upon week 1 of AEW Graded. And what an eventful opening show we've had. The first ever AEW Dynamite on TNT, of course. And thank you to everybody who joined mine and Adam's live stream, which has just finished at the time of recording. And thank you to everybody who donated as well. It was a great fun time. And then just lots of stuff happened on the show. We're going to break it all down. We're going to assign everything a lovely individual grade, and we're going to see how good the show was at the end of the day. So we start things off with the first ever show on AEW Dynamite on Wednesday nights on TNT. Rhodes, Cody, versus Sammy Guevara. This was a very interesting first match ever for the weekly TV shows of AEW, just because stylistically they're such a strange matchup. Cody often being, of course, slower and more storytelling and old school, and Sammy Guevara being very much a member of the new school, faster. I guess you could call him a spot monkey maybe. And I think it was going to be really interesting to see how the two matched up against one another. This match also benefited, it must be said, from a hot crowd, and in fact it's worth saying that the crowd were fantastic for most of the night. Like, they were a really energetic crowd and really helped, I think, push the show through some of its slightly weaker moments and actually give them a more of a positive sheen as a result. Early on there were one or two little miscommunications between Cody and Sammy, but they worked through those, and by and large I think this was a very enjoyable match. Certainly a success as the first opening match of the show's run. And the first big spot came when Sammy was on the outside. Brandi was having a go at him and he pulled her in the way of a Cody Rhodes suicide dive, and fair play to Brandi, she took the bump pretty full on. Brandi got her own back a little bit later on, clocking Sammy Guevara through the ropes, leading to the disaster kick, which led to a near fall, and there was an even better near fall slightly later with Sammy springing up to the top rope and drilling Cody with a really nice super Spanish fly, very impressive, back into the ring for a near fall. Sammy then went back up to the top rope and went for the shooting star press, but Cody got his knees up and cradled Guevara for the clean pinfall victory, which I think was a nice way to end the match. We all kind of suspected and maybe agreed with the fact that Cody was probably winning this one, especially with that title match against Jericho looming in the near future, but it was a nice way of having Sammy lose without making him look too weak. He wasn't cleanly beaten, well, he was cleanly beaten, but he wasn't decisively beaten by Cody. It was just a nice piece of wrestling expertise from the more experienced man, and I think that makes total sense in terms of storytelling. But it wasn't over there, because Tony Schiavone got in the ring. Great to see him back, of course, in the wrestling business. He got in the ring to interview Cody. Sammy cut him off and then went for a handshake with Cody. It all seemed to be nice and friendly, and then Jericho ran in. Big pop for Jericho making his first appearance on AEW on TNT, blindsiding Cody, and Sammy Guevara just got out of dodge as if to say, that's nothing to do with me. We'd find out a little bit later on if that was nothing to do with Sammy though. We'd find out. I mean, it was one of many things that happened in that main event, to be quite honest with you. Jericho beat down Cody as Guevara got out of dodge and powerbombed him onto some chairs and just basically did a big nasty Jericho beatdown. He bloody loves an ambush, does Chrissy J. He loves an ambush almost as much as he loves a little bit of the... Oh god, I've done it. I've went there. I've already went there. Overall, this gets a B+ grade. Really good opening match, I thought, of a high standard from both men. I enjoyed the booking with Sammy not looking too weak in defeat, and the Jericho beatdown was good for what it was. It totally worked. No complaints here. Next up, MJF versus Brandon Cutler, and thankfully, MJF did, as many of us hoped, get some promo time during his entrance, basically running down not only the crowd, which he's always insanely good at, but also his opponent as well, basically comparing Cutler to the fans, saying you're more of a fan than a wrestler, you should be on the other side of the guardrail. This was a pretty short match actually, which I think is a good thing. We don't want all of these matches on TV to be going 10 minutes plus when they don't necessarily have to, given the storylines at play, and this was one of those matches where I think it was better that it was shorter, but even so I was quite surprised at how short it was. For the most part it was really back and forth, with Cutler showing a lot of babyface fire here and there, but MJF always being intelligently, I guess, one step ahead, using sweet heel tactics with a Z to stay one step ahead of his competition. And then yes, after only a few minutes we got the finish, and I think it was part of the plan, but if it wasn't, I hope that Brandon Cutler's alright, but I think it seemed to be part of the plan. Basically, Cutler got on the top rope, but when he jumped off and landed, he did tweak his knee or his ankle or something like that, and MJF very opportunistically, very heelishly took full advantage, wrapping him up in an armbar and getting the submission victory. This is hard to grade because it was so short, really. There's not a lot to go off here. I'm going to give it a B-, I think, and that's not a big criticism. It's just that it was a very short match and neither guy got too much of a chance to really show what they could do, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. As I said, maybe sometimes shorter matches are better given what's going on in the wider context of everything. I thought it was a great idea to have MJF win, as we all thought, I think, and also I really did enjoy his promo too. In fact, his promo work I think pushes this into the B- sort of territory, even though it was a pretty short match. Next up, we head to ringside, where Jay and Silent Bob are just chilling in the front row as they do. Yes, Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes were there to promote their upcoming movie in which Jericho is featured. They gave a bit of an interview, but it wasn't long before they were cut off by Angelico and Jack Evans. The heels basically talk trash to the movie star men until, oh my god, I sound so weird. They talk trash to the movie star men until Mewes just goes, well, you never won a match. Oh, which is totally true. In AEW, Jack Evans and Angelico are yet to win a match, and as we all know, wins and losses bloody matter. Then the private party arrived through the crowd to give a drink to Jay and Silent Bob and have a bit of a drink with them and then leave or something. I don't really know. This kind of fizzled out, to be honest, but it did sort of serve a purpose. Let's get to the grade. This gets a C-. I understand the reason for it. You know, celebrity involvement, making AEW feel like a big deal straight off the bat. That's a wise move. I also enjoy that they're not getting involved too high up the card, you know, with guys like Cody and Jericho and stuff, because really I think the best place for celebrities in wrestling quite a lot of the time is to give more of an exposure to lower card feuds. At the same time, it was weird that this continued the feud between the private party and Angelico and Jack Evans after basically we've already seen the private party cleanly defeat Angelico and Jack Evans at the All Out pre-show. And yeah, as I mentioned, the segment just kind of fizzled out from there. It didn't really have the exclamation point you might want on a segment like this, but it was nothing offensive. It wasn't too bad. It gets a C-, which is about as good as it maybe could have been. Next up, we get a little video package of SCU. It's impossible not to do that when you talk about them. Kazarian, Daniels, and Scorpio Sky. They, a little bit earlier in the day, seem to be on location in Washington, D.C. Scorpio is dressed as the president. The other two are like his security detail either side of him. And they cut a promo basically saying, oh, we've done a lot of research and we've determined that this is the worst town we've ever been in. It's what we love to hear them say. It just is. Sometimes wrestling promos are really easy. We then go live to the arena where SCU are there in person, being interviewed by Tony Schiavone at the top of the ramp, which Adam Pacitti actually mentioned is a really nice throwback feel. It's great seeing people get interviewed on the stage. It just gives it that nice kind of throwback rather than them always happening in kind of sterile backstage areas or in the ring. It's nice to mix it up a bit sometimes. Scorpio Sky reveals that it's going to be the other two who represent SCU in the tag team tournament, Kazarian and Daniels, and then the Lucha Bros turn up, Phoenix and Pentagon, saying that they are the best tag team in the world. They get in each other's faces, they do dueling chants, and then they brawl, and it brings the segment to a nice violent close. This gets a C+. It was totally fine for what it was. It was the second non-wrestling segment in a row, and it kind of slowed the show a little bit, but every wrestling show can't be 100 miles an hour all the time, and I don't think it was really bad for what it was. C+ is the grade. I don't think this segment or the one before are going to have too much of a bearing on the overall grade, just because they were a relatively minor part of the show, but they kept certain feuds and certain storylines chugging along. Next up, maybe the match I was most looking forward to heading into this show, Pac versus Hangman Adam Page, the match that we never got, the match that never was at Double or Nothing. I think on balance this was probably the best work rate, pure, wrestling match of the show, between one of the best in the world in the form of Pac and a very, very good wrestler in his own right as well in the form of Hangman Page. This went over 10 minutes, it was very back and forth for the most part, very fast paced at times as well, as it needed to be and as it should have been, and it featured some really nice showcase spots too. I'm thinking most memorably, I guess, of Hangman Page's huge moonsault from the top rope to the outside, where Pac did a really good job of catching him and taking that nice bump as well. And then the finishing sequence began with Pac countering the buckshot lariat, and then with the referee Earl Hebner unsighted, he just drilled Hangman Page with a dirty low blow, because as much as we love Pac, he is a bastard and a heel, as we all know. This led to the Black Arrow from the top, and then the Brutalizer, the submission move that Pac used to shockingly defeat Kenny Omega at All Out, and it didn't submit Hangman Page, but it did knock him out, and the referee was forced to call for the bell. This like the opening match gets a B+ grade. It was probably better from a wrestling point of view, but not as much going on in terms of booking or storytelling. It was just a good match between two very good wrestlers. Maybe not as much as they could have done, given a bit more time on pay-per-view. I think if this match had happened at Double or Nothing, it probably would have been a little bit better, but at the same time, you can't really complain when it's a match that is very, very good on TV. I do think maybe you could argue that they should have been given a little bit more time, but with 2 hours to work with, you have to kind of say where would that time have been taken from to feed into this match. It was great for what it was, and Pat gets the win, which I think was the right call. Next up, the match to determine the first ever AEW Women's Champion between Nyla Rose and Riho. Dr. Britt Baker was out on commentary for this one. She will surely factor at the top of the women's division going forwards because she's one of the biggest and most heavily marketed stars of the women's division in AEW so far. But for now, this was very much all about Nyla Rose and Riho. And it's another difficult one to grade because when this match was good, it was really, really good. And when it was bad, oh, it was a little bit ugly at times. Once again, the crowd really helped this match. They weren't into it very much at first, but the two women worked really hard to drag them into it and to get them loud. And the crowd, to be fair to them, did get on board, as they did at so many points throughout the night. It was a little bit ragged at parts, as I say. Nyla Rose does look a little bit inexperienced in there from time to time, but Riho, who has years of experience, even though she's still relatively young, because apparently she started at 9 years old, she was able to drag her through some rough patches and make a pretty good match out of it. And yes, there may have been 1 or 2 miscommunications or slightly blown spots here or there, but the big set piece moments they didn't just go well, they all went off pretty perfectly, to be honest, and really helped make the match a better one than maybe the sum of its parts. I'm thinking of spots like, for example, Riho diving off the top rope with a big crossbody to the outside and Nyla Rose just plucking her out of midair, a great show of strength, or Nyla Rose missing a senton to the outside and basically just crashing onto a stack of chairs. What was the other one? Oh, the big jumping knee strike from the top rope onto Riho, who was draped over the top rope for a very convincing near fall. They were all really good spots and really did help push the match at times to the next level, which it did need given the weaker moments here and there. One of the drawbacks in terms of the booking of this match, I guess, is the fact that Nyla Rose essentially had it won at one point. She locked on the STF and Riho faded and was almost unconscious, and it looked like the ref was about to call for the bell, and then Nyla Rose let go and tried to finish her off by other means. Why would you do that realistically when you could become the first women's champion by just keeping the hold locked in? And that decision would come back to bite Nyla Rose as Riho was able to turn the tide in her favour with a big Northern Lights from the corner into the ring, and then a series of kind of almost like Bomaye, Kinshasa style running knee strikes and running drop kicks and that sort of thing, eventually culminating in a big knee strike which kept Nyla Rose down for the pinfall, and Riho is the first ever AEW Women's Champion. But once again, we had post-match shenanigans as Michael Nakazawa came out to interview Riho. He said on behalf of all the Japanese fans, but he never got a chance to, as a vengeful Nyla Rose clocked him from behind and then powerbombed him at the second time of asking, almost breaking his neck on the first attempt, but luckily it was all fine. But it was a little bit scary. She then went after Riho again, and Kenny Omega was forced to come out. A slightly sort of work shoot style thing, because behind the scenes he's the head of the AEW Women's Division, and he sort of calmed things down and protected Riho from the assault. Not quite certain what I think about that, but generally this whole match and the post-match segment is a really tricky one to assign a grade to. Ultimately, after quite a lot of thought, I'm going to give this a B grade, I think. A lot of the stuff was excellent and a lot of the stuff was sloppy with not that much in between, so it's really hard to decide what to give it, but it did have some big positives, this match, working in its favour. For example, the fact that all of the big important spots went off without a hitch, and in fact, added to the match immeasurably. Also, there was the fact that I think Riho winning is a very smart call, just because Nyla Rose I don't think looks quite ready yet, doesn't quite look good enough yet to lead the women's division. I think Riho is a much more capable candidate. And finally, the main event we've all been waiting to talk about because everything happened in this match and after it. Chris Jericho, Santana and Ortiz taking on the Elite, Nick Jackson, Matt Jackson and Kenny Omega. For the opening few moments, this match was fast-paced and exciting as you'd expect from the men involved, but it didn't take long before it just descended into actual chaos. Kenny Omega set up for his Terminator dive through the ropes, but before he could do so, there was a huge pop as Jon Moxley returned to the promotion, sliding in the ring from behind and waiting for Omega to turn around. Great visual, of course, and just attacking Kenny Omega. We never got that match because of Moxley's unfortunately timed injury, but now he looks back and it looks as though this match is going to happen at some point in the... Well, we know it's going to happen in the future. What am I talking about? But this built to it very, very nicely. They brawled through the crowd. It was really intense and stiff and everything you'd want it to be, reminiscent of their brawl at the end of Double or Nothing, of course. And it all culminated with Moxley in the sort of concessions area behind the crowd, putting Kenny Omega through a glass table with the Death Rider, a very cool, unique, and brutal visual. But I do have a problem with this. The problem is that the referee did nothing, basically. Omega was attacked in full view of the referee by someone not involved in the match. That should be a DQ by the letter of the wrestling law, even if, you know, Omega wasn't the legal man. I still think that should be a DQ. I would have just preferred it, just a tiny little adjustment, if the referee had been distracted while that had taken place, maybe by a big brawl on the outside, you know, from all the men in the match, and then Omega gets attacked in the ring, and we all move on, and the ref never sees what happens to Omega. That would have just improved things just ever so slightly for me, because all the while this match continued, I was thinking, why did the referee not throw the match out? But with Omega out of the equation, the match continues, and again, it's all very fast-paced, exciting, impressive spots, especially from the Bucks and Santana and Ortiz, of course, two of the best tag teams in the world, but with the heels, of course, now having a 3-on-2 advantage. The Bucks look to have fought their way back into the match and almost have it won, actually, looking for the Meltzer driver, but Jericho is able to cut Nick off with a really, really nicely timed code breaker, catching him in mid-dive and drilling him with the move, and from then on, it was kind of just all the heels, really. It was 3-on-1 against Matt Jackson. Santana and Ortiz hit him with some nice double team moves, and Jericho finished him off with the Judas Effect back elbow, the most unbeatable finisher in wrestling today. But again, it's not over, not by a long shot, and this is where everything kicked off, right? Okay, so I'll try and recap everything that happened in this post-match segment, the show closing segment, by the way. And God, they threw everything at it, didn't they? So the heels continue to beat the baby faces down. Cody runs out to make the save. He's in a nice, you know, waistcoat and tie now. He's managed to get a shower and get changed after his match. Lovely. Cody runs wild, you know, firing up, good old babyface style. But he's cut off by Sammy Guevara, who gets in the ring, looks at Cody and goes, "Sorry, man," drills him with a low blow and turns heel, aligning himself with Chrissy J. So now who's going to save Cody? Who's going to save the day? It's none other than his big brother, Dustin. But Dustin's in full gear for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe he thought he'd have to do a run-in at some point and got all painted up to give himself special face paint powers. But it looks like the Rhodes brothers are going to stand tall to end the show. And then, you probably know what happened by now. And then Jake Hager, formerly known as Jack Swagger, We the People, 5-star wrestling champion and wrestler extraordinaire, crashes the party on behalf of the heels, attacking Dustin Rhodes and announcing his arrival in All Elite Wrestling. He's the hot, new, young, upcoming talent of AEW, and God help us all. Hager powerbombs Dustin onto a table, and Cody is taken care of with another back elbow from Jericho. And this new heel stable stand tall. Jericho, Jake Hager, Santana, Ortiz, and Sammy Guevara. Could they be the dominant force of AEW going forwards? Bloody hell, what a finish to the show. What on earth do I grade that? Right, so this gets a C, okay? The match itself, really good stuff, very exciting stuff, of course, lots of good wrestlers involved, and the chaos afterwards was all really exciting in a bit of a guilty pleasure sort of way, with everyone running in, getting involved, all very car crash, attitude era style stuff. But there are two drawbacks for me, one little and one quite major. The minor drawback for me is, of course, the fact that the referee should have probably thrown the match out once Omega got attacked by Moxley, and I just wish the ref had been kind of distracted or even bumped when that happened. I think that would have just made things a little bit more tidier, but it's not a major issue. The major issue, right, let's talk about the major issue right now. So I know on Cultaholic we often make jokes about Jake Hager or Jack Swagger or whatever because of the whole 5-star wrestling thing, and we went to it and it was really funny and stuff, but I don't think that he's a bad wrestler, of course. I don't think Jake Hager, I think he's got a great size, a great look. I think he can wrestle really well. He's of course got that amateur background. It's just, is he really the right man for the job here? Is he not a bit of a square peg in a round hole? Basically, Hager's been there and done that. He's a former World Heavyweight Champion. He's an ex-WWE guy who is very WWE. He's not really representative of AEW, in my opinion. He's a bigger guy. He doesn't really do, you know, flips and exciting, innovative stuff. He's old school, and there is a spot for old school people, but I'm not sure if Jake Hager's brand of old school is what we really need right now. And I mean, it was a big shock and a big surprise, of course, but is it one that's going to be positively received going forwards? And what's his role going to be? And in a company with so many up-and-coming, exciting young talents, is this a case of a little bit of WCW going on, of an older guy who maybe isn't in the right position, taking the spotlight away from people of this generation whose time is really now? Still, at least, you know what, Jericho finally achieves his dream of being Shawn Michaels, because now he's got a big lackey. He's got a big Diesel to help back him up. Two dudes with attitudes ride again with Santana, Ortiz and Guevara, helping them all out. Overall, I'm giving the first AEW Dynamite on TNT a B grade. I thought the wrestling was of a generally high standard throughout, probably more than your standard Raw or SmackDown, and I think that by and large, the booking was pretty damn good. But then there were some things that prevented the show from getting a higher grade, namely that whole confusing Jake Hager thing. I don't know if that's the right way to end your first show on TV. Maybe it'll all pan out for the best. I don't know. We'll see what happens going forwards. But right now, I'm just a little bit wary. But yes, as I said, the wrestling was of a generally high standard, and I think that Cody versus Sammy was an excellent opening to AEW on TNT. And I also think that Pac versus Hangman Page was probably the best match of the night as well. That was all good. What I will also say though, is that from what I've seen and from the little bits I've watched and from what I've heard as well and from generally the response online, it looks like NXT put on one hell of a show this week, and probably, I'll watch it all in full after this video, but probably had the beating of AEW this week. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below, but at the minute, it looks a little bit like Triple H 1, Cody Rhodes 0. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just what it looks like from here. But anyway, an exciting start for sure for All Elite Wrestling on TNT. Very, very eventful. Some positives, some negatives. But at the end of the day, I'm excited to tune in next week to see what happens. And isn't that really what this is all about? Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.